Do you realize that the words you speak every single day are either building your future or destroying it? Think about it. History doesn't just remember people for what they did. It remembers them for what they said, for the way their words ignited hearts, nations, and shifted the course of human destiny. From Socrates to Churchill, from Martin Luther King to Gandhi, the greatest minds weren't just thinkers, they were communicators. And here's the truth. Every single one of us has that same power locked inside. But let me ask you, how often have you had something important to say, something burning inside you, and it came out flat, weak, or misunderstood? How many times have you wished you could speak with such power that people stop what they're doing, lean in, and feel your words in their bones? Because that's not just some gift handed down to a chosen few. It's a skill, a discipline, muscle you can build. And here's why you must lean into this with everything you've got in this world. It's not the smartest who win. It's not even the hardest workers. It's the ones who can influence, the ones who can inspire, ones who can communicate with absolute clarity and conviction. Your ability to speak is your ability to lead, to connect, to create impact. So I want you to stay with me, because over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to unlock the very tools the top minds of history used to shape empires, fuel revolutions, and awaken possibilities in people who had forgotten their own power. By the end of this, you won't just know how to speak like the greats, you'll feel ready to step into that same energy yourself. Clarity is power. Every great mind in history knew this. If you look back at the people who changed the world with their words, you'll notice something. They never hid behind big, complicated language. They didn't try to sound intelligent. They tried to make truth land in the simplest, clearest way possible. And that's what made them unforgettable. Because here's the reality. People don't remember complexity. They remember simplicity. They don't carry home 100 different ideas. You give them one clear thought, one simple phrase, and that becomes a weapon that lives in their heart for life. Think about the people who shaped history with words. When Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream," he didn't bury people under paragraphs of intellectual talk. He gave them an image so clear, so simple that anyone could hold on to it, from a professor at Harvard to a child sitting on a doorstep in Georgia. That's the power of clarity. When Churchill spoke to his people in their darkest hour, he didn't need flowery words. He said, "We shall never surrender." 16 letters, 3 words, and yet those words carried a nation through the storm of war. Because the truth is, the human mind craves clarity. When you speak with it, people feel safe, they trust you, and they follow you. Now let me be real with you for a moment. Most people overcomplicate everything when they speak. They load up on jargon, on long sentences, on trying to prove how smart they are. But let me tell you this, when you're speaking to prove, you're losing. You're losing the listener. You're losing the connection. You're losing the impact, because nobody's inspired by complexity. Nobody wakes up at 3 a.m. thinking about the $10 words you used. They remember the phrase that cut through the noise, the line that hit their soul, the truth that made them stop and say, yes, that's it. The greatest communicators weren't trying to impress. They were trying to transfer understanding. That's the difference. They didn't want people to admire their intellect. They wanted people to feel their message. And that's what you have to ask yourself when I speak. Am I trying to sound smart? Or am I trying to make it impossible for people to miss the meaning? Because if your words don't cut through, if they don't land in the heart of your audience, then they're just noise, and noise never changes lives. I'll give you a little secret. Clarity is not just about what you say, it's about what you cut out. Most of the time, power doesn't come from adding more. It comes from stripping away until only the truth remains. You want your message to be like a diamond, no excess, no fluff, just something so sharp and so clear it can cut through stone. That's why some of the greatest leaders in history are remembered for sentences, not speeches, because they knew clarity carries more weight than length. And let me tell you something else. Clarity isn't just for the stage. It's in your relationships, your business, your leadership, your life. Every fight, every breakdown, every failure in communication happens because of a lack of clarity. You say one thing, the other person hears another, and suddenly your world's apart. When you train yourself to speak with clarity, when you remove the fog, you build bridges instantly. People trust you because they understand you, and when they understand you, they'll move with you. Think about your own life. How many opportunities have you lost because you weren't clear? Maybe you had an idea, but you fumbled when you tried to explain it. Maybe you had a dream, but you couldn't put it into words that made others see it the way you did. Maybe you felt that frustration. The idea was alive in your mind, but when you spoke, it came out blurry and people just didn't get it. That's the pain of not having clarity, because the truth is, if you can't make people see what you see, you'll never move them. But the flip side is powerful. The moment you learn to speak with clarity, doors open. People listen. People believe. People move. Because when you're clear, you become unforgettable. You become the voice that cuts through the noise in a world full of confusion. And in today's world, where everyone is drowning in words, in messages, and information, clarity is the ultimate advantage. So how do you build it? You train yourself to ask one question before you speak. What is the one thing I need them to remember? Not 5 things, not 10 things. One thing. And then you build everything around that one truth. You strip away everything that doesn't serve it. You practice saying it until it feels like fire rolling off your tongue. Because when you speak with that kind of precision, your words carry weight. They don't float, they land. Another thing, clarity doesn't come from your mouth, it comes from your mind first. If you're foggy in your thoughts, you'll be foggy in your words. That's why the greatest minds spent so much time thinking before they spoke. They didn't rush. They understood their own message at the deepest level. When they opened their mouths, there was no confusion. Their words weren't just words. They were extensions of their certainty. And certainty combined with clarity is unstoppable. I want you to imagine something. Imagine standing in front of a room. As you speak, you see every eye locked on you. Not because you're loud, not because you're dramatic, but because your message is so clear that people feel like you're speaking directly to their soul. Imagine leaving that room and people repeating your words back to each other because they can't get them out of their head. That's the power of clarity. And that's not a dream. It's a discipline you can build starting now. So ask yourself, what do I need to stop overcomplicating? Where do I need to strip away the excess? Where do I need to get brutally honest with myself about what I'm really trying to say? Because when you master that, you stop being just another voice. You become a voice that shapes the way people think, feel, and act. The greatest minds of history didn't own clarity by chance. They owned it by choice. And if you're serious about speaking with the kind of impact that can move people, shift rooms, leave a legacy, then clarity must become your obsession. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voice that wins, it's the clearest. Logic makes people think, but emotion makes people move. That's the difference between someone who informs and someone who transforms. You can have the smartest ideas in the world, the perfect strategy, the most bulletproof logic, but if you deliver it without emotion, it dies the second it leaves your lips. The people who shaped history understood this better than anyone else. They didn't just communicate knowledge, they transferred energy. They didn't just talk to the mind, they lit the heart on fire. Think about it. If pure logic were enough, all be billionaires in perfect shape, living flawless lives because the steps are obvious. Eat clean, exercise, save money, invest smart. That's logic. But people don't follow logic. Do they follow emotion? They follow the story that grabs them. They follow the voice that makes them feel like their life has meaning again. That's why the greatest leaders and speakers of history weren't necessarily the most intelligent people in the room. They were the most emotionally compelling. When Martin Luther King Jr. stood on those steps in Washington, he didn't say, I have a plan. He said, I have a dream. That wasn't logic. It was emotion. It was vision, fire, passion. Because he spoke from that place, his words transcended barriers of race, age, and education. They reached something deeper in the human spirit. People didn't just agree with him, they felt him. And once people feel you, they will follow you anywhere. Mistakes so many people make when they speak is they hide behind facts, statistics, and intellectual points, thinking that's what creates influence. But facts don't inspire action. You can drown someone in data. All you've done is give them more reasons to stay stuck. Emotion is what breaks the pattern. Emotion is what pierces the noise. Emotion is what makes someone stop in their tracks and say, this matters. Because people may forget the details of what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Now, when I say emotion, I don't mean drama. I don't mean yelling louder or waving your arms around like you're performing. Emotion is about authenticity. It's about letting the truth of what you're saying bleed through your words so strongly that it's undeniable. It's the courage to be raw, to be vulnerable, to let people feel your conviction rather than just hear your argument. And that's not something you fake. It's something you embody. The great minds spoke from a place of absolute alignment. Their emotions matched their words. Their body matched their message. There was no separation. That's why people believed them. Because the human brain can detect when someone is speaking from the head alone versus when they're speaking from the soul. One feels cold, the other feels alive. People are starving for aliveness. They're drowning in logic every day, news headlines, endless information, nonstop opinions. What they're craving is someone who speaks straight to their heart, someone who makes them feel hope, courage, possibility. Ask yourself when you speak, are you giving information or are you giving transformation? Are you trying to prove a point or are you trying to stir something in people that changes the way they see themselves in the world? Because that's what emotion does. It bypasses the walls of doubt and plants seeds directly in the soil of belief. Logic can convince someone for a moment, but emotion can move them for a lifetime. Think about the last time you made a big decision. It purely logical? Probably not. Maybe you justified it with logic, but the real moment of decision came from an emotional shift. You felt a sense of urgency or excitement or even fear, and that emotion drove you to act. And if that's true for you, it's true for everyone else. So if you want to speak like the top minds of history, you can't just load up people with information. You've got to ignite the emotion that gets them to act on it. So how do you do that? You connect to your own emotional truth first. If what you're saying doesn't move you, it will never move anyone else. You can't stand up there cold and expect to warm the room. You've got to let yourself feel the weight of your words. If you're talking about pain, remember your own pain. If you're talking about possibility, connect to the fire of your own vision. Let your body carry that energy. Let your voice reflect it. Let your eyes show it. Because when your emotion is real, people can't help but feel it. And here's the beauty. You don't need to be perfect to do this. In fact, perfection kills emotion. People don't want flawless. They want real. They don't want the polished robot who never cracks. The human being whose passion spills over, whose words carry the electricity of lived experience. When you share that piece of yourself, you create connection. And once there's connection, influence follows. The greatest communicators were masters at this because they weren't afraid to be fully alive in front of others. They didn't apologize for their passion. They didn't tone themselves down to make others comfortable. They allowed their emotion to amplify their message, and that's why people still remember them generations later. You have to decide if you're willing to step into that same level of energy. You willing to risk being misunderstood by some in order to be unforgettable to many? Are you willing to open yourself up, to let your words carry not just information, but your very heartbeat? Because that's the difference between words that get heard and words that get felt. So don't just aim to speak to someone's head. Speak to their heart. Speak to the part of them that's hungry for hope, desperate for courage, longing for belief. Your words carry the kind of emotional power that makes people stand taller, breathe deeper, and see possibility where they only saw limits before. Because when you do that, you're not just talking anymore, you're awakening. When you awaken someone emotionally, you don't just change their day, you change their destiny. The greatest communicators of history understood something most people never master. Words alone are not enough. Words by themselves are just sounds in the air, but when you combine words with imagery, when you make people see what you're saying, you move from being a speaker to being a visionary. That's what separates people who are forgotten from people who leave a mark on history. The top minds of history painted pictures with their words so vividly that their audiences could step inside those visions and feel them before they ever became real. Think about it. When John F. Kennedy stood before the nation and declared that America would put a man on the moon, he didn't bury his audience in scientific detail. He didn't walk them through rocket designs or engineering schematics. He gave them an image. A human being walking on the surface of the moon, an American flag planted in that dusty ground. That image, that mental picture, was so powerful that it created a movement. People could see it before they believed it because they could see it. They believed it could be done. This is the secret. Human beings think in pictures, not in words. If I say dog, you don't see the letters D-O-G in your mind. You see the image of a dog. If I say freedom, you don't think of the dictionary definition. You think of a moment, a feeling, an image tied to that word. That's why the greatest leaders, speakers, thinkers didn't just tell people what to do. They showed them through language. They used metaphors, stories, and examples that made their ideas feel real. And here's the mistake most people make when they speak. They stay abstract. They say things like, we need to work harder, or we need to change. But those are empty words without imagery. What does work harder look like? What does change feel like? If you want to move people, you can't stay in the clouds of abstract concepts. You have to bring those concepts down to earth where people can see them, taste them, touch them. That's the power of painting pictures with your words. The great minds did this instinctively. Luther King didn't just say he wanted equality. He described little black boys and girls joining hands with little white boys and girls walking together as brothers and sisters. That's an image. That's a picture people could see in their minds. Because they could see it, they could desire it, they could fight for it. It wasn't just an idea anymore, it was a vision. And visions are far more powerful than words. Now let's bring this to you. Imagine you're trying to inspire a team, your family, or even yourself. If you say, we've got to step up, that might register for a moment, but it won't last. But if you say, right now, we're standing at the base of a mountain, the peak is up there, and the climb will be steep. Imagine the view when we get to the top. Imagine standing there together, breathing the air of victory, looking down at how far we've come. That's where we're going. Suddenly, people don't just understand your message, they see it. That image drives them in ways words never could. This is why stories are so powerful. Stories aren't just entertainment, they're mental movies. When you tell a story, you're giving people an experience. You're letting them step into a world, feel the emotion, see the details, and walk away with a lesson that sticks. Facts fade, but stories last. People might not remember the statistics you give them, but they will remember the story of the boy who overcame the odds, woman who refused to quit, the team that rose from nothing. Because stories are pictures, and pictures stick to the human mind like glue. So when you speak, ask yourself, am I giving information or am I giving an image? Am I making this abstract? Am I making this tangible? Because if you want to speak like the top minds of history, you can't just throw words. You have to paint pictures. You have to make your audience feel like they are standing inside the vision with you. When they can see it, they begin to believe it. And when they believe it, they will act on it. Here's another truth. Painting pictures with your words also unlocks emotion. If I tell you, never give up, that's a statement. If I tell you about the man who kept getting knocked down 10 times and stood up 11, blood on his face, eyes burning with determination, refusing to let the world break him. You don't just hear perseverance, you feel it, you see it. That image will stay with you far longer than the phrase, never give up. That's how you transfer belief. And here's the best part. You don't need to be a poet to do this. You don't need to be a master storyteller with perfect phrasing. You just need to be real. You need to take your ideas and translate them into pictures. Instead of saying, we need to improve, describe what life looks like when you've improved. Instead of saying, this matters, show people why it matters. Simpler the image, the stronger it lands. People don't follow statistics. They follow visions. They don't fight for percentages. They fight for pictures in their mind of a better tomorrow. That's why revolutions don't start with data. They start with words that create images, words that people a glimpse of a future that feels alive. And the moment people can see that future, they'll do whatever it takes to make it real. So don't underestimate this. The top communicators weren't magicians, they were painters. They painted with words instead of brushes, and the canvas was the minds of the people listening to them. And those paintings lived on beyond the moment the words were spoken. That's why we still remember them. That's why they still move us today, and you have that same ability. The next time you speak, don't just aim to be heard, aim to be seen. Don't just deliver words, deliver visions. Let your message become an image that takes root in the minds of those who hear you. Because when people can see what you're saying, they'll never forget it. Words without conviction are empty. You can have the right phrases, the most polished speech, the perfect delivery on paper, but if your words don't carry belief behind them, people will feel it instantly. Conviction is the difference between a whisper that fades and a voice that echoes through time. And the top minds of history all had one thing in common when they spoke. They didn't just speak words, they spoke with certainty, with alignment, and energy that told you they weren't just saying something, they were living it. Think about the last time someone tried to convince you of something they didn't fully believe themselves. Maybe it was a salesperson reading off a script. Maybe it was a leader reciting a line they'd been told to say. You could feel the disconnect, right? You knew there was no weight behind their words. And what happens when there's no conviction? The message dies. It doesn't matter how polished it is. If the person speaking doesn't believe it, no one else will. Conviction is contagious, but so is doubt. If you're uncertain, your audience will be uncertain. If you're hesitant, they'll hesitate. When you're all in, when you're aligned, when your words and your being say the same thing, people can't help but lean in and believe with you. That's why the great communicators could move millions. They didn't tiptoe into their message. They embodied it. They carried it in their tone, their body, their eyes. They believed it so completely that it radiated off them. And because they believed, others began to believe. Conviction is not about volume or force. It's about authenticity. It's about congruence. When every fiber of your being lines up with what you're saying, people feel it in their bones. Think about leaders in history who spoke during times of chaos. The world around them was uncertain, but they were not. Their conviction became an anchor for everyone else. When Winston Churchill stood before his people during the darkest days of war and declared, "We shall never surrender," he wasn't making a suggestion. He was stating a truth he embodied because he believed it. His people believed it. That's the power of conviction. It doesn't just inspire, it transfers certainty to others. And this is where most people miss it. They think speaking is about finding the right words, the right gestures, right techniques. But techniques without belief are just tricks. You can learn all the tricks in the world, but if your heart isn't aligned with your words, they'll ring hollow. People may clap politely, but they won't be moved. On the other hand, you could stumble over your sentences. You could be imperfect, but if you have conviction, people will feel it. They'll forgive the flaws because the energy of truth outweighs the polish of performance. Conviction doesn't come from memorization. It comes from embodiment. It comes from being so connected to what you're saying that you don't need to perform. You just need to let it out. When you speak from that place, your body naturally aligns with your words. Your tone naturally carries weight. Eyes naturally lock in with intensity. You don't need to manufacture presence. It's there because your conviction is real. But here's the real challenge. Conviction can't be faked. You can't pretend to believe in something you don't and expect people to buy it. The human mind is wired to detect incongruence. We feel when someone's words don't match their energy. That's why the key is not just to choose your words, to choose your truth, to find the message you believe so deeply that when you speak it, there is no hesitation. And if you don't yet believe, then you've got to do the work. You've got to align your mind, your body, soul with the message until it becomes a part of who you are. Ask yourself right now, what do I speak about that I actually believe with every fiber of my being? Where do my words and my truth align? Because that's where your greatest power lies. That's where you'll stop speaking and start transmitting. Conviction isn't about talking, it's about transferring energy, certainty, belief from yourself to others. When you have it, people can feel it before you even finish the sentence. At the difference between someone who says, "I think we can do this," and someone who says, "We will do this." Same idea, completely different impact. One is hesitant, the other is certain. And people don't rally behind uncertainty. They don't follow hesitation, they follow conviction. They follow the voice that says, "I don't just believe this is possible, I know it's possible." Because deep down, people are craving certainty. In a world full of doubt, uncertainty, hesitation, the voice that speaks with conviction cuts through the noise like a blade. This is why aligning your words with conviction is non-negotiable. If you're not aligned, people will feel it. If your body says one thing but your words say another, the body wins. If your tone says one thing but your words say another, the tone wins. Communication isn't just about words. It's about the alignment of your entire being. That's when people feel you. That's when they believe you. How do you build conviction? You live your message. You embody it daily. You don't just talk about courage, you practice it. You don't just speak about growth, you live it. The more congruent your life is with your words, powerful those words become. Because then when you speak, you're not trying to convince anyone, you're simply sharing your truth. And truth, when spoken with conviction, has a resonance that no technique in the world can fake. Greatest speakers in history weren't perfect orators, they were aligned human beings. They believed in their vision so deeply that their words carried the weight of their soul. That's why we still remember them. Because they memorized the right lines, but because they embodied the right truths. And that's the opportunity for you. If you want to speak like the top minds of history, don't just chase better words, chase deeper alignment. Don't just memorize lines, live the message. Because when you do, conviction will pour out of you effortlessly. People won't just hear what you say, they'll feel who you are. And in the end, that's what moves the world. Because words may touch the ears, but conviction touches the soul. One of the greatest traps people fall into when they speak is trying to impress. They want to sound intelligent. They want to look important. They want the audience to think, whoa, this person is really smart. And the irony is the moment you make it about you, you lose the audience because people don't care how impressive you are. They care about how you make them feel about themselves. The greatest communicators in history understood this. They didn't speak to elevate their own status. They spoke to elevate the people listening. Think about the voices that have lasted through time. Did they use their words to build themselves a pedestal? Did they use their words to build bridges to others? Did they leave people thinking, what a genius? Or did they leave people thinking, I am capable of more than I ever realized? That's the difference. Anyone can puff themselves up. Only true leaders lift others higher with their words. And when you lift others, they will never forget you. Here's the truth. Every person walking into a room already has their own battles, their own doubts, their own fears. Most people don't need another reason to feel small. They need a reason to feel strong. They need a reason to believe in themselves again. And that's where your responsibility as a communicator comes in. The purpose of your words is not to prove that you're powerful. It's to remind others that they are powerful. The moment you shift your focus from how can I look good to how can I make them feel good, your entire presence changes. You stop performing and you start serving. That shift is magnetic. People feel it when you're speaking from ego versus when you're speaking from service. Ego creates distance. Service creates connection. Ego says, look at me. Service says, see you. And every human being is starving to be seen, to be understood, to be reminded that they matter. When you give them that, you own the room, not because of how great you look, but because of how great you make them feel. Think about the greatest speeches you've ever heard. The ones that stayed with you weren't filled with fancy vocabulary or intellectual gymnastics. They were filled with words that reminded you of your strength, your possibility, your potential. They were words that elevated you. That's why you still remember them. That's why they still live in your chest today, because someone spoke in a way that didn't just make them shine, it made you shine. Here's the mistake so many people make. They think influence is about status. They think, if I look more important, if I look more intelligent, if I look more impressive, then people will follow me. But it doesn't work that way. People don't follow importance, they follow impact. They don't follow someone who makes themselves look big, they follow someone who makes them feel bigger. If your words elevate others, you'll never have to chase influence. It will chase you. If your goal is only to impress, you'll end up empty. Because the truth is, nobody cares about your credentials in the long run. They don't care about your vocabulary, your degrees, your titles. They care about how you made them feel about themselves when you spoke. Did you remind them of their potential? Did you awaken their courage? Did you spark their belief? That's what lasts. That's what makes your words live beyond the moment. So ask yourself when you speak, what's your intention? Is it to show how much you know, or is it to awaken what others already have inside of them? Because that one choice changes everything. If your goal is to impress, you'll posture, you'll perform, you'll push people away. But if your goal is to elevate, you'll connect, you'll inspire, and you'll pull people closer. The more you elevate others, the more they will see you as a leader, as someone worth listening to, as someone they can trust. The great minds knew this because they lived it. They weren't perfect. They weren't flawless. They weren't always polished. But when they spoke, their focus was never on looking untouchable. It was on making others feel unstoppable. That's why they're remembered. Not because they proved they were great, but because they made others believe that they could be great. When you speak to elevate, everything changes. Your tone shifts because you're not trying to dominate, you're trying to empower. Your body language shifts because you're not standing above people. You're standing with them. Your words shift because you're not trying to sound smarter. You're trying to sound clearer so people can feel what you're saying and apply it to their own lives. You stop being a performer and you start being a leader. And the irony is you stop trying to impress people. You actually become more impressive because authenticity is always more powerful than performance. People don't want to show, they want the truth. They want someone who's real, who's raw, who's willing to stand there and say, this isn't about me, it's about you. That's when walls come down. That's when people listen. That's when transformation begins. So the question is, What kind of speaker do you want to be? Do you want to be the one who walks off stage and people say, wow, they're so smart, but then forget you the next day? Or do you want to be the one who walks off stage and people say, I feel different, I feel stronger, feel alive again? Because one is impressive, but the other is impactful. And impact will always outlast impression. The top minds of history left a legacy because they understood this. Their goal wasn't to shine brighter than everyone else. Their goal was to light a fire in everyone else. And if you want your words to live beyond the moment, if you want to speak in a way that truly changes people, then you must let go of the need to impress and embrace the responsibility to elevate. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how high you can stand, it's about how high you can help others rise. There's another level to speaking that most people completely overlook. It's not just the words you choose, it's how you deliver them. Words are without rhythm, without timing, without energy, can fall flat. The greatest communicators in history didn't just know what to say, they knew when to say it. They knew how to pause, to build tension, how to shift their tone, how to slow down when they needed the audience to feel, and how to speed up when they wanted the audience to rise. They treated speech like music, because in many ways it is. If you want to truly move people, you must master the rhythm of impact. Think about a song that you love, a piece of music that stirs something inside you. It's not just the lyrics, it's the rise and fall, the way the sound builds, the way it quiets down before exploding again. That rhythm takes you on a journey, and speaking works the same way. The top minds of history didn't deliver flat monologues. They played with rhythm. They pulled their audiences in, lifted them up, held them in suspense, and then released the energy at the perfect moment. That's why their words didn't just inform, they ignited. Look at someone like Martin Luther King. His speeches carried the rhythm of a preacher, the cadence of a drumbeat, flow of something alive. He didn't just read words, he delivered them like waves. His I have a dream speech still resonates not just because of the message, but because of the way he delivered it. The rhythm built carried people higher and higher until they felt they were part of something greater than themselves. That's not an accident, that's mastery of rhythm. And rhythm isn't just about sounding good. It's about creating emotion. It's about guiding people through an experience. When you pause right before the punchline, people lean in. When you slow down on a critical point, people feel its weight. When you pick up your pace, your audience's energy rises with you. Rhythm creates engagement. It keeps people from drifting away. It makes your message stick because it's not just entering their ears, it's entering their nervous system. The mistake most people make is they speak in one tone, one speed, energy level from beginning to end. And when you do that, you lose people because the brain tunes out repetition. If everything sounds the same, nothing stands out. But when you use rhythm, you create contrast, you create peaks and valleys, highs and lows, moments of silence that are louder than words. That's what makes people remember. That's what makes people feel like they've been taken somewhere. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're trying to inspire someone with a powerful truth. You could rush through it, throw it out quickly, and maybe they'd hear it, but it wouldn't sink in. But if you slow down, if you let each word land, if you pause just long enough for it to settle, suddenly the truth has weight. Suddenly it's not just a line, it's an experience. Silence, when used with intention, can be one of the most powerful tools you have. A pause creates space. And in that space, the audience feels. On the flip side, there are moments where you want to build energy, where you want to create momentum. That's when you drive your words with pace, with rhythm, like a drumbeat pulling people forward. You stack your phrases, you let your voice rise, you bring the energy higher and higher until people feel like they can't sit still anymore. That's how you get hearts racing, how you get energy flooding the room. Great communicators knew how to dance between these two worlds, stillness and motion, quiet and power, slow and fast. They weren't just speaking, they were orchestrating an emotional journey. That's why their words didn't fade away when the speech ended. They lingered, they echoed, they became part of the people who heard them. This is something you can practice. You don't have to be a natural born orator to master rhythm. You just have to become intentional. Record yourself speaking. Listen back. Do you sound flat? Do you rush through everything? Do you avoid silence because it feels uncomfortable? If so, that's the place to grow. Learn to embrace the pause, to let words breathe. Learn to use silence as part of your delivery. Then learn to bring energy in waves, to build, to release, to drive your audience forward like a current. And let me be clear, this isn't about performance. It's not about pretending to be theatrical. It's about authenticity, about allowing your natural energy to rise and fall in a way that matches your message. Rhythm isn't something you force. It's something you allow. It's letting your passion guide the pace of your words. It's letting your conviction dictate when to slow down and when to surge forward. The rhythm of impact is born when your message, your body, and your emotion are all aligned. Here's the beauty. When you master this, you don't just capture attention, you hold it. In today's world where people are distracted by everything around them, capturing and holding attention is the ultimate superpower. Rhythm does that. Rhythm keeps people with you. Rhythm makes them feel like they're not just listening to a speech, they're part of an experience. And people don't forget experiences. So ask yourself, how are you using rhythm in your communication? You speaking in one flat tone, hoping your words are enough? Or are you delivering your message like a song, like a story, like something alive, Because if you want to speak like the top minds of history, you've got to master not just the words, the rhythm that gives those words life. The top minds didn't stumble into impact by accident. They shaped their message with precision, they carried it with emotion, and they delivered it with rhythm. That's why they're remembered. That's the opportunity you have to speak in a way that doesn't just get heard, but gets felt, remembered, and carried forward. Because words are just words until rhythm turns them into music, and music is what moves the soul.